She was abandoned at age 12, raised in an orphanage and left with nothing but a needle. Decades later, her name would appear on a handbag that sells for $5,000, costing less than $200 to make. She didn't just build a fashion house, she built an empire of perception. What if I told you that the world's most iconic luxury house, with a logo recognized everywhere, was built on a foundation of scandal and survival? Before Chanel became a global fashion empire worth $35 billion, there was just a young woman named Gabrielle Coco Chanel, with nothing, no money, no family fortune. Chanel wasn't just built by a woman who rose from poverty to redefine femininity. She went through 2 world wars, accused of Nazi collaboration, and a post-war exile that most brands wouldn't survive. Yet somehow Chanel did, and it thrived. But if you ask Coco how she built it all, she might have told you a version of the story very different from the one you're about to hear. Because that's how she wanted to be remembered. This is the true story of how a woman with $0 didn't just build a brand, she built a legacy. Gabrielle Coco Chanel began her life in squalor. Born in 1883 to an unmarried laundry worker and a father who sold goods on the street, her childhood gave no hint of the empire she would later build. After her mother died of tuberculosis and her father left the family, 12-year-old Gabrielle was sent to the Aubazine orphanage. There, in a strict monastery run by nuns dressed in simple black and white, she learned how to sew. That simplicity stuck with her. Over time, it became part of her personal style. The hard years she spent growing up made her value practicality and freedom, 2 ideas that would later change how women dressed. When she left the orphanage in her late teens, Gabrielle worked as a seamstress by day and sang at cafes at night. That's when she got the nickname Coco. More importantly, she met wealthy men who introduced her to a life she had only seen from a distance. One of them, Etienne Balsan, brought her into his world of high society. Chanel paid close attention to how rich people lived, walked, and dressed. She saw that luxury often looked beautiful, but it wasn't made to be useful. Even wealthy women were stuck in clothes that followed tradition, which are not practical. In the upper-class homes and stables she visited, Chanel found her chance. In the early 1900s, when Chanel began designing clothes, women's fashion was very restrictive. Their bodies were pulled into tight corsets, and they wore layers of heavy, uncomfortable clothing. It was like being a bird in a pretty cage, dressed up to be looked at, but unable to move freely. Chanel began to push back against these outdated rules during World War I. Because fancy fabrics were hard to get during the war, she used jersey, a soft, stretchy material that had only been used for men's underwear. What started as a practical choice turned into a bold statement. Women deserved clothes they could actually live in. She took more ideas from men's clothing, like simple shapes, pockets, and neutral colors. Her black dresses, sailor-style tops, and relaxed shapes gave women more freedom. In a time when rich people showed off with over-the-top outfits, Chanel made poor chic fashionable. Simple clothes that looked smart and confident. Chanel knew that fashion wasn't just about clothes, it was about identity. Wearing Chanel wasn't just dressing up, it was about stepping into a new way of thinking, one where a woman could be strong, elegant, and independent at the same time. She wasn't just selling fabric, she was selling possibility, and soon she would go even further, creating something you couldn't see or touch, but would remember forever. Chanel's rise in French society didn't happen by accident. It was shaped by a series of relationships that gave her access to a world she had only seen from a distance. Her first serious relationship was with Etienne Balsan, a rich cavalry officer who kept her as his mistress. Balsan introduced her to the luxury of high society, horses, large estates, and the private world of the French elite. But Chanel soon realized that in Balsan's world, she would always be on the outside. She was a guest, not an equal. That changed when she met Arthur Boy Capel, Balsan's friend and a successful English businessman. Chanel became his mistress too, but this time it felt different. Capel believed in her dreams. He gave her money to open her first boutique and pushed her to build something that represented independence and modern style. With him, Chanel imagined a life where she wasn't depending on powerful men. She could create something for herself. For the first time, Chanel saw a real future. But even this relationship ended in heartbreak. Capel had other relationships and eventually married Diana Wyndham, a wealthy English aristocrat, so he could stay in high society. Chanel was left embarrassed in public and deeply hurt in private. A few years later, Capel died suddenly in a car crash. It broke Chanel emotionally and symbolically. The life she thought she was building with someone else disappeared in an instant. Chanel learned a hard lesson early in life. Wealth and power could be offered, and just as easily taken away. If she truly wanted freedom, she had to build it herself. That lesson became part of the Chanel brand. To her, luxury wasn't about fancy things. It was about never needing anyone's permission again. By the 1920s, Chanel wasn't just dressing the elite. She had become one of them. Her stores attracted aristocrats, artists, and the wealthy. These connections gave her brand power and status. But the same connections that helped her rise would soon lead to a darker chapter. When war spread across Europe, Chanel's closeness to powerful men and her survival instincts would pull her into controversy, a controversy that would follow the brand's name for decades. But before all of that, she created something that made her name unforgettable. Chanel's idea of selling identity, not just clothes, reached its peak in 1921 with a product that had nothing to do with fabric. At the time, perfumes were mostly made of simple flower scents and sold in fancy decorative bottles. These bottles were designed to show off wealth, not creativity. The perfumes were only used for special occasions and had names like Evening Rose or Jasmine Dreams that left little to the imagination. But Coco Chanel wanted to break the rules. She didn't want something soft and predictable. She wanted a bold, modern scent that was as different as the clothes she designed. So she teamed up with Ernest Beau, a Russian perfumer who shared her bold ideas. Together, they created something brand new, a unique blend of over 80 ingredients. It was complex, abstract, and impossible to copy. Even the bottle was different. While other brands used detailed, decorated bottles, Chanel chose something simple. She picked a clean glass bottle with straight lines and sharp edges, like a lab flask. The design was modern, neat, and confident. Even the name was unusual. Instead of something romantic or sweet, she named it Number 5, because it was the 5th version Beau had given her. The name sounded simple, modern, and mysterious. But Chanel Number 5 wasn't just powerful because of the smell. It was powerful because of how it made people feel. Chanel made it hard to find, which made it even more desirable. Owning a bottle felt like a reward, something special that showed good taste. The real genius of Chanel Number 5 was how it became a social symbol. The bottle looked simple and wasn't made just for women. Wearing it meant you understood modern style, classy without showing off. It became a quiet way to show who you were without saying a word. But perfume fades. And in a world that cares about what things look like, Chanel realized she needed something people could actually see. So in the early 1920s, she introduced a symbol, 2 interlocking C's, standing for Coco Chanel. It was simple, clean, and instantly recognizable. It started with perfume. Then that logo began to appear on handbags, buttons, clasps, and store signs across the world. A logo designed to whisper luxury, not shout it. But not everything about Chanel was meant to be seen, because while her perfume quietly made its way into dressing rooms around the world, Coco Chanel herself was about to step into the shadows. In the 1920s, Coco Chanel was already changing what it meant to be a modern woman. She had launched Chanel Number 5 in 1921 and signed a business deal in 1924 with the Wertheimer brothers, who were in charge of selling the perfume around the world. The Wertheimers brought money, resources, and international reach. But over time, Chanel became upset. She felt the deal was unfair and believed she deserved more control and more money from the perfume that had her name on it. By the 1930s, Chanel was at the height of her fame. Her fashion empire had grown around the world, and her image became a symbol of luxury, style, and modern life. She had gone from being a poor orphan to someone who spent time with kings, business leaders, and powerful politicians. But as World War II spread across Europe, those powerful connections became both a way to protect herself and a serious risk. During the war, Chanel lived at the Ritz Hotel in Paris, which was controlled by the Nazis at the time. The Ritz was where many German officers and French collaborators stayed. While living there, Chanel started a romantic relationship with Hans Gunther von Dinklage, a German aristocrat and a known Nazi spy. Their relationship was no secret, and over time it became more than just personal. Later, German intelligence records revealed that Chanel was listed as Agent F7124, working under Dinklage. We don't know everything she did, but it's clear she was involved in secret efforts to act as a middle person between the Nazis and the British. One of these attempts may have included a plan to speak with Winston Churchill's government behind the scenes. But Chanel also had another reason for helping the Nazis, one that served her own interests. The Wertheimer brothers, who owned most of the Chanel No. 5 business, were Jewish. When they fled France during the war, Chanel tried to use Nazi anti-Jewish laws to take over the company. She claimed that as a non-Jewish business owner, she should be allowed to own it. But the Wertheimers had planned ahead. Before leaving France, they transferred control of the company to a trusted non-Jewish friend to protect it. Chanel's plan didn't work. After Paris was freed in 1944, she was questioned about her ties to the Nazis. But no formal charges were brought against her. Some believe Churchill may have used his power to protect her, though this has never been proven. Still, her reputation took a serious hit. People in France knew what she had done, and after the war, public opinion was often harsher than any court. In 1945, Chanel left France and moved to Switzerland, where she stayed out of the spotlight for nearly 10 years. During that time, the Wertheimers took back full control of Chanel No. 5, and the company kept growing, without Chanel in the public eye. Most fashion brands wouldn't have survived a scandal like this, but Chanel wasn't like most brands. She had done something few people managed to do. She became part of the culture itself. Even with the controversy, the interlocking C's still stood for elegance and confidence. And while many believed her story was over, Coco Chanel wasn't finished yet. By the early 1950s, Coco Chanel was seen as an outsider in the fashion world she had helped create. She had spent nearly 10 years living quietly in Switzerland. Her brand had survived, but her reputation was still damaged because of her actions during the war. Paris had moved on. A new designer, Christian Dior, had taken over the fashion scene with what he called the new look. It was all about big skirts, tiny waists, and soft, ultra-feminine styles, the exact opposite of what Chanel had stood for. Chanel was now 71 years old. Her name still mattered, but many people thought her time was over. The fashion world was being led by young, bold designers full of energy and excitement after the war. To most people, Chanel seemed like a thing of the past, old-fashioned and forgotten. But she wasn't ready to disappear. In 1954, she returned with a brand new fashion collection. There was no big celebration, no makeover, no attempt to follow the latest trends. Instead, Chanel focused on what she had always believed in: simple, wearable clothes. She brought back tweed suits, relaxed shapes, and calm colors. No fancy decorations, no tight corsets, no bows to current trends. Just clothes that women could work in, walk in, and live in. The French fashion critics were harsh. They called her collection boring, old, and out of touch. But Chanel didn't care about their opinions. She wasn't designing for them. She was designing for a new generation of women. Working women, younger customers, and especially American buyers who were tired of fashion that was too complicated or too flashy. In the United States, people loved it. Buyers were excited about how clean, easy, and smart the clothes looked. Women said the outfits made them feel confident. Chanel's jackets and suits weren't just seen in fashion shows anymore. They showed up in offices, art galleries, and embassies. The comeback that Paris tried to ignore was now being led by women across the world. This wasn't just a return. It was a comeback on her own terms. At a time when most people would have given up, Coco Chanel stepped back into the fashion world and changed it again. Not by chasing new trends, but by proving that her style had never truly gone out of fashion. But even as the world celebrated her return, the woman behind the brand remained a mystery. Coco Chanel had reclaimed her place in fashion, but what had it cost her? What did the world really know about the woman whose name now stood as a fashion powerhouse? As 1971 began, Coco Chanel was 87 years old, tired, unwell, and still working. Even though her health was getting worse, she stuck to her routine. She was preparing the spring catalog from her private suite at the Ritz Hotel in Paris, where she had lived for over 30 years. On Saturday, January 9th, she went for a long drive. That night, she wasn't feeling well, so she went to bed early. Her final words to her maid were simple: "You see, this is how you die." By the time she passed away, Chanel's name had become bigger than the woman herself. She wasn't just a person anymore, she was a symbol, an empire built on fashion and image. But if you had asked Chanel how she created all of it, she might have told you a version of the story that was very different from what you just heard. She claimed she was born in a chateau, that her father left to find success in America, and that she was always a self-made woman, strong, independent, and untouched by pity or help. But the truth was different. She was born into poverty, left behind at a convent, supported by wealthy lovers, protected by powerful people, maybe even governments, during a time when her wartime actions could have had serious consequences. She told her life story the way she made her clothes, carefully shaped, edited, and designed to look just right. And maybe that's what made her so unforgettable. Because for Chanel, truth wasn't the product, image was. And even though the real story is messier, more complicated, and full of flaws, it's also more amazing. She started with nothing, built a brand that lasted for generations, lived through scandal, isolation, and change, and turned her name into one of the most powerful symbols in fashion. Chanel didn't just build a legacy, she became one. But even legends can fade. And after she died, many believed the Chanel brand would slowly disappear into fashion history. Until in 1983, a man with a ponytail and a fan walked through the door and turned the House of Chanel into something no one saw coming. If you thought Coco's story was wild, wait until you see what Karl Lagerfeld did with it. Tap subscribe and step behind the curtain with Noble Narratives, where we uncover the hidden power plays, scandals, and legends that shaped the world of luxury. And if you thought Chanel's story was wild, the Best of Noble Narratives playlist takes you deeper into the most fascinating and untold stories behind the world's most powerful brands. I'll see you there in a second. Cheers!